The Nintendo 64 is one of Nintendo's most revolutionary consoles for introducing the world of 3D to many of Nintendo's big-name franchises. But with it being one of Nintendo's first 3D consoles, resulted in a wide variety of titles to be cancelled during this transition into 3D. Also, the 64DD just existing. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at some of those lost games of the Nintendo 64. You cannot have a video talking about the Nintendo 64 without mentioning Super Mario 64. And luckily for us, this game happens to be related to one of the most infamous cancellations of the console, Super Mario 64 2. The game would start development around August of 1996 with a simple prototype of split-screen co-op between Mario and Luigi, which was already tested during the original development of Mario 64 before being scrapped. Similar to Luigi, Yoshi would have also made his debut in Mario 64 after being removed in the original as a writable partner. But aside from these statements, the prototype has remained elusive in terms of what else it could have had. The game was planned to release in 1999 as a 64DD exclusive, which was Nintendo's recent add-on to the console to increase its power. But Miyamoto would put the game on hold to focus on Zelda 64. The same Zelda 64, mind you, that went through all of these changes. And by the time the game did release, the 64DD was considered a flop in its home country, making this the final nail in the coffin to Super Mario 64 2. Kind of? Technically, there was Mario 128 that was a spiritual successor to both Mario 64 1 and 2, and remerged in 2000, spearheaded by Miyamoto. But that's a topic for a completely different console. And as of right now, the original prototype of Mario 64 2 on the 64DD still remains as a mystery. While the 64DD was definitely a goldmine for unreleased and cut content for the N64 library, one game that gets somewhat overshadowed by its bigger contemporaries is that of Desert Island 64. Developed by Imagineer and planned to release on the 64DD, Desert Planet was a game starring an unknown character who has to survive on a desert island. While survival may be its initial genre, the game was in reality a mixer between a survival game, platformer, and life simulator. You were able to breed new animals, create civilizations, and interact with the ever-evolving food chain of plants and animals. There were even claims that the game was going to use every feature of the 64DD, which if true, could have made Desert Island a standout title for its time. But as time went on from the original showcase of Desert Island until Shinkai 1996, it would slowly vanish from public eye despite being planned to appear on E3 of the same year. The reasons for this was due to financial troubles that Imagineer was going through, resulting in the cancellation of Desert Island 64 alongside Crest 2 to save costs. And as of right now, no prototypes from Desert Island 64 has resurfaced. What is left is screenshots from magazines. Kirby Air Ride is often seen as one of the GameCube's most beloved titles, but the game was originally planned to take a different form in its original state, that being Kirby's Air Ride. But to get to Kirby's Air Ride, we need to start back to an even older version. In Shinkai 1995, the earliest version was shown off as Kirby Bowl 64, and was more of a spiritual successor to Kirby Dream Course, with Kirby having to go through a course while avoiding obstacles and attacking enemies with a select number of putts. The game would have also contained a 4-player arena mode where you had to knock your opponents off stage, and a skateboard power-up you can find in levels. Following Zosenkai, Kirby Bowl 64 would return once again in 1996, this time renamed as Kirby's Air Ride. While the game at this stage in development contains some elements of the GameCube version, it also has a lot of differences to it, such as larger maps, playable mini-bosses like Poppy Bros Sr. and Mr. Frosty, and even the ability to roam freely without your gear. There are even rumors that state that the original City Trial mode was going to be much larger and ambitious by giving you the option to travel towards distant islands. But that's not been confirmed from the footage we have of City Trial. Despite looking rather complete, Kirby Air Ride would get cancelled in 1996 until resurfacing in 2003 as the current Air Ride that we know today. And no prototypes have leaked of both Kirby Bowl 64 or Air Ride. The original version of Mutter Free for the N64 is considered as not only the biggest cancelled game on the N64, but cancelled games as a whole for its cut content, story, and general mystery. Too bad we won't be talking about it in this video. Instead, I'll put my focus on another 64DD game developed by Itoi, Cabbage. Cabbage was announced in the April 1997 issue of 64 Dream, and was in development for about 5 years at that point by Itoi, Miyamoto, Hisahara, and Arata. The game would have been a breeding game where you have to raise a creature known as Cabbage by feeding it, carrying it around, and even giving it toys, with Itoi comparing the game to that of Tamagotchi. The main selling point was that of the 64DD's clock, which would have been able to track the time and day in the game world even after your console's off. Cabbage would have also contained compatibility with the Game Boy via the transfer pack, allowing for Cabbage to be taken with you on your Game Boy. The game's development would go rather smoothly during the time of a 1997 interview, but would go silent after missing its debut in Space World 2000. The last mention of Cabbage before its cancellation would be a March 2000 issue of 64 Dream, where Itoi stated that the friendship game, Cabbage, was still in development. While there is no definitive statement on Cabbage's cancellation like Mutter Free, it seems that the 64DD's failure, Itoi's development on Mutter Free, and the busy schedule that everyone else had at the time were the reasons why. And as of right now, no prototype or even screenshots of Cabbage have ever resurfaced online. All the games we discussed this far had a clear vision for what they were, thanks to screenshots and magazine scans. But one game that doesn't follow any of these rules, despite being announced on the E3 floor, was Cat Roots. Developed by Mari Gold Management, Cat Roots was announced at E3 of 2000 as a short tech demo. It contained an orange cat running away from a mouse in a city environment in a Tom and Jerry-esque scene, with a tech demo ending with a cat being turned into a cactus in the game over screen. Aside from the footage, no one really knew what the game was about, and when confronted about the game by an IGN reporter, Nintendo just stated, "We were told to put it out there." Later in E3, Miyamoto would address Cat Roots, but only stated that it was developed by Mari Gold with no official announcement in sight. After E3 2000, Cat Roots would fade into obscurity, with no further information about the game's plot, genre, or even gameplay. It remains as not only one of the most mysterious titles in this video, but the N64 as a whole. When people mention cancelled games on the N64, the big name franchises tend to get mentioned a lot. Your Marios, Kirby's, Zeldas, etc. But one franchise that has to be mentioned among of Nintendo's biggest in the 90s has to be Pokemon. A franchise so popular that it could have changed the console wars if a game happened to release on the N64. And that almost happened with a cancelled title, Pocket Monster 64. Pocket Monster 64 was announced during the June 1997 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly. In it, Miyamoto will discuss the upcoming games of the soon-to-be-released 64DD. And among these would include Pocket Monster 64 as one of the planned launch titles. And when further questioned about Pocket Monster 64, Miyamoto discussed how the game would release for the 64DD exclusively in Japan, and how only 10 people were currently working on it, with no further information on if the game was going to release in the West. 3 months later, Miyamoto and Hisahara would be in an interview discussing 3 upcoming titles for the 64DD: Hey You Pikachu, Pokemon Stadium, and Pocket Monster 64, with Hisahara stating how the 64DD storage would allow for Pokemon from Gold and Silver to be transferred in these titles. But when Sosinkai 96 passed, only Pokemon Stadium, Snap, and an early build of Gold and Silver would show up. And aside from a light mention of a home console game being in development, nothing else from Pocket Monster 64 has resurfaced besides the possibility of some of its elements being reused in the N64 titles or Gold and Silver. Considering how many projects Game Freak were developing at the time, Pocket Monster 64 could have been pushed to the side on focusing on the Pokemon brand rather than going all out with a home console mainline title. But even if that's the case, it does show the reality of the N64, a console that while being revolutionary, still had bigger plans that never came into fruition, ranging from spin-offs, new IPs, sequels, or even a new mainline title to the biggest franchise in the whole world. If only things could have been different for the N64.